Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mill. Today, Molly and I have an awesome interview for you with Apiary designer Connie Vogelmann. So she's going to be joining us today, and we're really excited. And if you didn't know, Apiary, Stonemeyer's newest game, just launched on Stonemeyer's website on Wednesday, October 4th. And we wanted to let you hear from Connie a little bit. So, Connie, you want to just give us a quick hi and then we can jump into some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I just want to say thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on the show. I'm happy to chat, and I'm really happy to talk about Apiary. I'm really excited about the game, and I'm really excited to share it with people. So thanks so much for having me.
We're really happy
Great.
to have you here.
Thanks so much for coming on. Molly and I have both had a chance to play Apiary a couple times, so we're extra excited to get to talk with you and talk a little bit about how Apiary came to be. On that note, kind of our first question was, Jamie has mentioned that you were at Stonemeyer Design Day back in 2021. So we were just kind of curious. This is your first published design. So what inspired you, or how did you think about going to Design Day back 2 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So Design Day, I went to Design Day for a couple of different reasons, and one was so I had been designing Apiary since 2019. I was actually originally going to go to the 2020 Design Day, which got postponed due to COVID. But I kind of keyed in on that event for a couple of reasons. One was we're big Stonemaier fans. We like a lot of the Stonemaier events. I was also a lead playtester for Stonemaier, so I was sort of plugged into the network and got the email and was like, oh, this sounds like a great event. And I'd also heard really good things about it. I mean, from people who'd gone before. So part of it was definitely that. And then part of it for me too is that I work best on a deadline. So if I can give myself some kind of an quasi artificial deadline that, all right, I'm going to have the very best prototype I can by date X, I tend to do a lot better. And so, this was actually back in 2019, looking ahead to the 2020 design day. Apiary was coming along really well. And I was like, you can keep tinkering with these designs until literally the end of time. I mean, they're never done to a certain extent. And so I was like, I'm going to have the very best prototype I can by that exact date. And I should mention too that the DC board game design community is really great. So we had gotten plugged in, looped in with like Elizabeth Hargrave, Matthew O'Malley, and some of the other local designers. But I mean, both of them are obviously Stonemaier designers, so it was kind of front of mind. So that's why I ended up at Design Day.
I love what
All
you
right, so
said about
then,
oh, sorry, Carol. I
oh
was
no,
just
you
gonna
go for
say
it, Molly.
I love what you said about needing the deadline. I signed my game up for Design Day, and I've never made so much progress on it since I had to now.
Well, and yeah, because it's so easy to sort of get caught up in some of the little details. So like, all right, I'm gonna make this prototype extra nice. I'm gonna futz around a little bit extra with the cards. I'm gonna just make this tweak and that tweak and this other tweak and not make a ton of forward progress. But like having that deadline looming really is like, okay, I'm gonna iterate, again and again and again. And I do think that's really good to do either kind of a real deadline or sort of a quasi fake one.
It's really
That totally
helpful.
makes sense. Very cool. So then, Design Day. So you signed up for it, you got your deadline. So what was it like actually going there and kind of being with all these other designers and just the experience in general? And then actually kind of that evolution of getting it signed with Stonemaier, because that obviously doesn't happen a lot at Design Day. So you kind of describe that experience, like that day, and then kind of the aftermath of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, by the way, appreciate that my cat's in the background, your cat's in the background. We just have all the
Yeah,
cats in the background.
it's
But
a
anyway,
Stonemaier thing. There has to be
yeah,
cats.
yeah, exactly. But anyway, yeah. So the first thing was it was definitely scary. I am very introverted, so walking into a room full of strangers with a game to judge your game is, I mean, not that judging is really the primary focus of Stonemaier, but they're going to be playing it and giving you feedback, and that was a little bit terrifying. But once I got there, everyone was really welcoming. Everyone was really positive. I mean, even some of the folks who didn't like the game so much had really positive things to say about it. Um, and I got some really good feedback. One of the really amazing things about the design day is it's so well scheduled. So, ahead of time, you know exactly when you're coming with your game, you know exactly who's going to be play testing your game. So you know how many folks are going to be at each playtest. And you really all day can go from playtest to playtest to playtest. Yours and then somebody else's and back to yours. And so that was just an incredibly satisfying and rewarding experience. The other thing that caused a lot of trepidation before I actually got there was, how is this game going to be received? I'm a pretty new designer. I've been testing it with more or less the same group of folks for the last year. Is anyone else going to like it? I mean, these generally the people you play test with a lot, you're friendly with, they're not going to tell you your game is absolutely terrible. So when I got to strangers, what were they going to say? And so I obviously got a lot of positive feedback. Folks generally seem to really like the game. So I came out of it really, really energized. The stuff with Stonemaier sort of happened actually a little bit before design day, but mostly after design day. So as I said before, I had gotten connected with Elizabeth. And so a couple weeks before design day, I sent her a message and I was like, hey, Elizabeth, like, I'd really like Stonemaier to consider this game. Like, what do you recommend? And she just said, email Jamie. Like, he'll be fine with it. Just email him. So I shot him an email, dear Mr. Stegmaier, and basically asked if he'd be willing to consider my game. And his response was basically like, he'll try to take a look, design day is really busy, submit the formal submission form, which I did. And then at design day, Jamie wasn't able to do much with the game. I mean, he's obviously running design day, but I do think what he did, is send a friend to play test the game sort of in his stead. And then I think that friend reported back to Jamie that he thought the game had promise. And then so after design day, Jamie and I got to sort of chatting about it. The very first thing Jamie said was, A, he thought it still had some rough edges and I needed to work on it a little bit more. And B, he was really concerned that Honeybuzz had just come out, which is a mid-weight bee-themed worker placement game. And would I be willing to move the game to space? And that was where I spent probably 5 seconds thinking about it. I was like, this is a great idea. This solves so many problems. It's such a good idea. I love science fiction. And then I sat around the rest of the evening trying to make sure it sounded like I had given it suitable consideration, so I wasn't like selling out my game. And then after very careful consideration, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, it was a great idea. It worked really well. And then the next couple months, I basically emailed back and forth with Jamie. He helped me workshop some rough edges. At one point, Jamie asked for a video of the game, so one of my friends helped put it on Tabletop Simulator, and then a few other friends recorded it, so we recorded a version of them playing the game. Sent it to Jamie. After that point in time, he thought it was promising, and then I sent him the prototype. And then after that, it got signed in about November. So that's sort of the, what happened kind of before, during, and after design day.
That had to feel like a whirlwind.
It was a lot of like, it was a whirlwind because, as you said, I mean, you don't go in to any playtesting event expecting to get a game signed. I was really sort of planning to use design day as kind of a test. I mean, does this game have promise? Should I keep working on it? Should I start trying to figure out how to pitch games? I wasn't expecting anything to come directly out of design day. So yeah, it was an absolute whirlwind.
It's so cool, and I love the pivot, the bees in space. That brings me to my next question. I wanted to talk about how I feel the theme integrates into the gameplay so well. I was wondering if you started designing the mechanisms first or the theme. I always wonder that with games that have a really strong theme, and how you integrated them together. I love bees, so...
Yeah, no, bees are great. Honestly, they're so cool. But so in this case, so I tend to be a more mechanism first game designer. I will be the first to say that. But I will say that in the case of Apiary, the game actually had its theme and, to be honest with you, its name within about the first or second conversation in my very first kind of brainstorming session of the game. I mean, the whole premise of the game is, what if you had workers that aged and died? Obviously, with the move to space, they now hibernate, which is slightly more positive, which I appreciate. But that's kind of the core premise, and it just clicked with bees instantly. I mean, because that's, if you are thinking from the perspective of a queen bee, the queen is managing this ever-changing pool of workers. Like, none of the workers stay around very long. Most of them last like a few weeks. And so it kind of fit instantly with that. I will say, though, that and then I'll kind of comment with that, from the very beginning, there was this tableau building element, this hive building, you are building a hive, and then all of the other mechanisms sort of support that. I mean, all right, you have to gather resources, you have to refine some of your resources, you have to build out your hive, you have capacity limitations, all of that really kind of came from that central idea. But I will say there were some really cool elements. I don't know if you want to talk about it now or in a little bit, but there are some really cool elements that I think came out of the shift to space. So I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more.
Sure. That was to be my next question, so I can ask it now. What you had to change mechanism-why when you shifted into space?
It initially started out being almost just a straight reskin, and that this was before I presented it to Stonemaier. As part of that initial process before we signed it, we did add sort of a second refined resource. But the very first switch to space, really the only change was, well, now they hibernate, they don't die. But through development, I think we actually really built out and kind of beefed up a lot of those space elements. So one of them, for instance, are the hive mats. They look like ships, and you're kind of building out your ship over the course of the game. That would work, yep, exactly. And that would work with a regular beehive, but not as well. Another thing that they're doing is, they're planting seed cards, they're researching and then they're kind of tucking seeds. It's kind of representing technological advancements. That's something that definitely fits a lot better with the space theme. Also, the planetary exploration system, I think, works really well. The way that it works in Apiary is you have a shared queen ship, so all of the players are collectively moving a ship around the board. And then you're actually making the all of the planets better. Yeah, it's such a cool miniature.
But you're actually this guy, like that is like high on my list, is to paint him a nice.
I'm scared to be honest with you, because I don't want to mess it up. But yeah, so you're making all of the planets better that you visit, which I think integrates really, really well. And then the other thing that I'll mention too is just from a core gameplay standpoint, I always had this idea of kind of helper bees that are coming in from other hives. They are kind of some of the tiles that you can build. It makes a lot more sense when they're kind of sentient species than when they're regular bees, and same with some of the technologies that give them new kind of advancements and cheats around some of the rules of the game. Again, that works a lot better when they're in space. The very last thing I want to mention, and I know I'm sort of droning on a little bit, is the dances. One of the things that I like the best about the game is you can basically set your own conversion over the course of the game. So there's a convert spot where you turn stuff into other stuff. But one of the things in Apiary that's really unique is there are these sort of rectangular tiles, and over the course of the game, different players have the opportunity to fill those in, which can really change the course of the game, and they are called dances, sort of after bees waggle dances. But I really like this idea that for the bees in this game, it has become this really important cultural element, and you teach a dance and then you get renown and essentially queen's favor with the queen for teaching good dances to the other bees in the game. So I think that's a really cool part of the game and was really facilitated by the move to space.
I love that the dancing made it into the game. I still remember watching the Magic School Bus when I was a kid, learning that bees danced to communicate. And this is the first thing I've seen that remembered that with bees as the theme.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, waggle dances are super cool. I mean, if you ever are bored at night sometime and want to Google, bee waggle dances, they actually look pretty cool. So it's a very cool phenomenon that I think got represented into the game in a really fun way.
I agree. I think the 20 factions have really helped with the sci-fi theming as well.
Yep.
You can just do whatever you want with those, and it's just so believable.
Absolutely. And the factions were actually there from the base game. I think the version that I brought to Design Day had, 12 or 15 factions, something like that. And I really wanted those variable player powers in from the beginning, just because I think it really opens up your decision making, and it makes every game feel a little bit different. And it also kind of sends everyone on a slightly different path. I didn't want the game to be something where there's a correct first action. The player in the first seat does action A, and then the player in the second seat does action B. And by differentiating those factions, both in terms of the abilities and the starting resources, it kind of sends people off in slightly different directions. But yes, I agree 100% that it works a lot better and is a lot more believable when they are spacefaring, advanced sentient bees and not just regular honeybees.
I'm gonna just skip ahead a question. Molly, you can go back, but I feel like we're kind of already talking about it. But one of our questions was, so there are a ton of different factions here. And there are five mats. So how did that decision come to have 5 of these and then make that variation with the different factions? Just undesign curiosity of, I love the slight asymmetry because it's just neat and it makes every game different. But how did it become so many of these and then 5 of those?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of pieces. The really easy answer is the hive mats got added at the very end. That was one of the last pieces of the game to come into place. And it was, before it was just free form, you could build wherever you want. One of the playtesters said, hey, I'd really like to have kind of a build, a guide to build. And we're like, that's a great idea. So part of the reason is that they were added a little bit late. We had the 20 factions quite a bit earlier, so that number was fairly fixed. You know, I said I had 12 or 15 factions when I initially brought it to Stonemaier. Then actually what got added were the 5 basic factions. And I think that was a really good addition because one of the things that Jamie commented on, and I think it's spot on, is that some of the advanced factions, if you don't understand the flow of the game, can actually be a little bit deceiving and can maybe send you down slightly the wrong path. It takes a little bit of getting used to the flow of the game, and so I think having the base factions, where all they do is give you a little bit of differentiated endgame scoring, that's basically it, I think is really, really good for the game. So that's how we got all the way up to 20. The slightly more complicated answer with the faction mats is that they're difficult. We're actually very constrained because you have the physical size of them. They can only be a certain amount of size or they don't fit in the box anymore. You also have, we wanted them to make them all the same number of hexes. We also wanted to have a certain amount of adjacency between where you put your faction tile and the spaces to build around them, so that they all had a similar feel. And then we also wanted to make sure that all of the hive mats felt a little bit different while also working with all 20 factions. And that was the really key element, is because if you have a faction that's pushing you really hard into one part of the game, you can't have a hive mat that's pushing you into the completely opposite part of the game, because then you just have a really unfun situation. So we were trying to make all of the hive mats basically generalized enough that they would work with all of the factions while still feeling different. And that was actually a little bit of a design challenge. And I will admit that I am glad we kept it at 5. Otherwise, it would have been really complicated. And also the last bit of it too is we wanted to make sure we had plenty of play tests with all of the different combinations. And because we already had the 20 factions, if we'd had 20 hive mats, that would be like 400 plays to just get one play with each combination.
Play testing.
Yeah.
And that's what expansions are for too, more stuff.
Well, exactly. And I think that that's definitely a place that you could do a lot within in the expansion. More hive mats, you could do more factions, more of everything basically. I think you could do a lot more without even actually adding any new mechanisms. I mean, I think there's a lot of room to kind of continue iterating and continue expanding. So
I have to say, the last game we played a couple days ago, I had this one.
That's actually my favorite one.
It's been my favorite too so far. I love the name too.
Yes. Oh my gosh. The Poppleton? Am I saying that right?
Poppleton. Yeah. Well, and they're actually all of the, well, with the quasi-exception of the log, they're all actually real beehives. So the Langstroth is the hive that the most beekeepers use, but all of the others some are kind of obscure, but there are other actual beehives that people use. The log is obviously a little bit of a joke. I mean, they just sort of, bees will live in logs. Yeah, exactly. And so I did my best within the constraints of the hex grid to kind of make them look a little bit like their actual beehive, inspiration.
It's super. Yeah, the combination of the faction with them, I think, is really fun. Like having the dual asymmetry that isn't like too crazy, that it doesn't seem like you can have a combo that's gonna send somebody in a much better direction than someone else.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one that can be a little bit tricky is and now I'm blanking on the name of which one it is, but the one that gives you the free worker bees. That one definitely works a little bit better, or let me put it this way: it takes a little bit more experience to navigate that one well with some of the some of the factions more than the others. Yeah, the log. Thank you. And actually, that one is in the other. And I will say that one actually, I was a little bit worried during playtesting that one was too weak, but in the plays that I've played since, I'm like, oh, this one feels great. So I think so.
We've played a couple 4-player games at this point, and people have been able to figure all of them out at this point. Yeah, it's been fun.
Excellent. I mean, and that's the goal. I mean, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, but there are certainly engine and building elements to the game. You're making your situation stronger, but a lot of it is about finding those combos. I mean, figuring out how to leverage your faction and your hive mat and your seed cards and your tiles to kind of make things pop off a little bit in different directions. I mean, that's, I think, a really big part of the game.
Did you have any other
We kind of talked about them, so I think we're on to your next one.
All right. So, and this is actually kind of a good thing, is we're talking about mechanics and everything. I know you just did a video with Jamie where you were comparing other games and how they relate to Apiary. So if people want to see like that full breakdown of you guys talking about 10 games, and as we talk, here's another cat. Oh, same cat. Okay. Likes the bee game as well. likes the bees. But you guys just did a great video on kind of 10 games. If you like Apiary, you probably like these, or if you like these 10 games, you might like this part of Apiary. But I know you kind of talked about a little bit in the video, but could you just give us either a quick rundown or maybe just tell us maybe a couple of what games did you feel like inspired you when you were like going through Apiary designs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously a big part of Apiary is the bump mechanism. None of the worker placement spots are ever blocked. But every time you go to a worker placement spot, for the most part, you're bumping somebody else's worker back to them. That was obviously heavily inspired by mostly Charterstone, actually, although I know Euphoria did it more. We had a really great experience with Charterstone. We played through the campaign 2 or 3 times and just absolutely loved it. And I absolutely love the decision space that comes with bumping. Some of the kind of old school style worker placement games are so tight. And it's like somebody takes the spot and you're like, well, now I don't have a decision anymore. Like there's a lot of planning that goes into the beginning of every round about sequencing and figuring out what's the most important decision or what's the most important action that you have to take. But like after somebody takes that spot, you're just done. So I really like this sort of bump mechanism because you can really, I think the more you play one of these bumping games, the more you can really kind of, oh, okay, well, if I sequence this a little bit differently, then they have to pull their bees back and I'm not giving them a free worker back and things like that. And so I think it's a much more interesting design space. It also tends to feel a little bit more positive too, because like if somebody gives me my worker back, it feels really great. And so that was a big part of it. I talked about this a little bit in my video with Jamie, but the Voyages of Marco Polo was actually a huge inspiration. It has continued to be one of my favorite games, and it's also one of the first games that I played that had dice placement. And I really, really like that dice placement aspect for a couple of reasons. And one is, you have this idea of worker strength. And I think that adds a lot of complexity to the decision making of a game without really increasing the rules overhead a lot. Because, if I have a spot and if it, I have variable rewards based on the value of the worker that I place there, that's a very easy concept for me to understand, but it's not a huge amount of rules. But it's a really difficult decision because all of a sudden it's not now just throw a worker on a space. It's which specific worker do I throw on which space? And so again, I think with all of these games and with all of these designs, you're trying to find the most decision space and the most interesting decisions in the sleekest package. And I think this sort of dice placement or, apiary numbered worker placement really kind of gets into a really nice sweet spot. So those are probably the 2 games that influenced apiary the most.
I definitely felt the Charterstone vibes right away when we were playing.
I went straight to Euphoria.
Oh, really? Well, there we go. We're currently in like a 2-year-long Charterstone game on Steam. Carol and I.
2 of them.
Yeah. So it's on my brain all the time.
Yeah, but the extra decision space on some of those spaces where it's not just like bumping them, it's trying to bump them and think of their number B with your number B. It just adds that extra layer that I don't think I've really seen in other games.
Yeah, and I did.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you have to think about, like, do you want to level up their B for their next turn? Like, there's a lot of interesting decisions with that. Like you said, doesn't add a lot more rules. It's just fun little thoughts on your turn.
Yep, absolutely. And I absolutely really love the double worker placement spaces in apiary. So in apiary, there are several spaces, the different number depending on which side of the board you're using, where you have 2 Bs. And so it might be your bee and somebody else's bee, and the combined strength of those bees influence what you can do. And I really love that because a lot of times somebody will place a high strength bee, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, that just opened up a new option. Like what can I do with this now? And I think it really it's a very kind of positive player interaction.
I think so too. Okay, I wanted to ask, did you anticipate all the attention you would get with this game? Obviously, Stonemaier is a growing company. You know Elizabeth and Wingspan has been a huge hit. Yeah. And now you're going through it with Apiary and the game's not even out quite yet. Although this video, it'll be closer to everyone's hands. Has it been a whirlwind? All the interviews and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, I was sort of expecting, I was a little bit prepared. I was mentally preparing myself because as you said, I have worked with Elizabeth and sort of, and she's obviously such a good sort of spokesperson for, women and diversity in gaming and game design and everything. But so I was sort of aware of the fact that Stonemaier gets a lot of attention. Stonemaier has an awful lot of wonderful, wonderful fans, and then there's also, of course, with that come folks who would love to see Stonemaier not do so well. And so there's obviously a little bit of that. I will say it has felt very exhausting, because kind of in a vacuum, I think I would just like kind of keep designing games and stay in my little introvert corner and play games with my friends. But I also think it's really important in this case to be a little bit visible for two reasons. And one is I really like Apiary. I really want to promote it. I really want to do everything I can to try to help the game succeed just because of all of the folks who have put so much time and effort into it. And the other thing, too, is kind of this diversity piece. I mean, there aren't very many female game designers. There are more now than there were a few years ago, which is wonderful. But game design is still overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. And I do think it's really important sort of for all of the other game designers out there to be like, hey, you can be a little bit different and be designing games. And so to the extent that I can be visible, I want to for that as well. So.
And we love that. I'm all for diversity, and
so
you doing
awesome.
it gives me confidence, and it just helps. It's nice. Like you said, there's more women designers, but there's still not enough.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And again, it's still, would love to get more, folks of color and of all kinds of, backgrounds and everything as well. Again, it's more diverse than it used to be. But, if you look at pans of Gen Con, it's pretty white, it's pretty male. And, I'd love to get more kind of diversity at all levels. So.
Me too.
Awesome. All right. So as we're kind of talking about Apiary here, and as I said, people at this point have started ordering it. It's going to start getting in people's hands. Is there any advice you would give to first-time Apiary players? If so, what would it be? Just to kind of maybe kickstart them when they're first reading it and first going through that rule book in that first play.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd actually love to get your guys' thoughts on this too, because I know you've both played the game as well. But I would have a couple of pieces of advice. And one is, even if you're a fairly experienced game group, I would say start with those starter factions. When we got our version of the game, we immediately jumped to the advanced factions, and the feedback that we got, even from some very experienced game designers, was, man, I wish I was playing with a base faction. Because the flow of Apiary takes a little bit of getting used to. Just you have this worker bumping and the aging and the time of the game, and it just, after you play it a time or two, you really kind of get the sense for it, and then you start adding in the extra factions, which can further manipulate that timeline and the flow of the game. But so our feedback has been definitely like start with those starter factions. The second thing that I would say is be a little bit patient. It takes a little while for the game to click. I mean, obviously, if you hate it on the first play, like don't put yourself through it again. But if you're a little bit ambivalent on it in the first play, like give it another shot, because I think it'll really start clicking. And that's been our experience with folks, that they reasonably like the first play and then they love the second play. So there seems to be, I think, a little bit of a learning curve there. And then the last thing I would say too is, as we talked about before, it's a combo game. So try to keep your options open and try to be a little bit flexible. If you don't have anything else to do, grabbing those seed cards can be really good, because they can really catapult you in a lot of different directions. So what are your guys' thoughts? As I said, I know you've both played the game.
I think the starter factions are very helpful as well. It gave me a solid go for the yellow tiles strategy when everything was new to me. And I didn't quite know the clock on the game, so if I had chosen like a higher skill faction, I might not have ever got to feel that I was popping off with them before it ended. But because I started with the basic one, I had a few yellow ones by the end, and I felt good. The ending has snuck up on me a few times.
It does that.
Already.
It does that. Yep.
Be aware of that, everyone. It's good when you know about it. It's that viticulture kind of fun tenseness where you're like, this game's ending any minute, but I don't know the exact minute.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because the hibernation comb, is the tracker of the game. So every time a bee hibernates, it fills up a space in the hibernation comb. When the hibernation comb is full, the game ends. It's not a linear process. So it's not every couple of turns you get one. It's nothing.
Yeah, the last game we played, I definitely told that, because both times I played, I've taught 3 new people. And I learned from the first one. The second one, I'm like, guys, this is just gonna blow up. Look at all those 3s and 4s on the board. This is just gonna end. That's what it did.
And I'm sure
It was
there's
not because
advanced,
the cat jumped on the board, even though she did. We saved it.
and
Yeah.
there's advanced strategy in not aging them, but when you're new, I feel like you always age them. And so
Yeah.
that ending will sneak up on you, I'm telling you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think like one of the advanced factions, for instance, allows you to level up or level down a bee every time you place it, which can really either speed up or slow down the game. And so I think until you kind of have that framework of how the game plays, throwing something like that in just makes it a worse experience, I think, for folks. But I think can be really rewarding once everyone has played and you have that experience.
The
Also, think it's
advanced,
more fun to not be afraid to try everything. Like our first game, I'm like, no one's done a dance yet. I'm gonna go do the dance thing because that's just fun and no one's done it yet. I think that's a really good thing for the first game is not to be afraid just to be the first one to try it because I think a lot of people want to like go the exploration part and try to get the resources because it's a cool like how you get resources mechanic and it's like and you gotta do something different. And
Yep.
so I think that's just be willing to not worry about necessarily points that first game and just explore it and see what's there. So, the next game, like, oh, I can do this and I can do this. I thought that was kind of thought that made it more fun in a sense, was to be willing to just try everything.
yeah,
No, I think, yeah. Absolutely. And I think too, I mean, it's a game where the vast majority of your points come at the very end. And so a lot of it, I think, is really, yes, it's a competitive game. Yes, you score. Yes, there's a winner, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it is like, can you do the thing? Can you set out to do a specific thing and do the thing before the game ends? And if you do, I think it can feel really good. And then you kind of compare scores at the end. But I think that's a great point. I mean, definitely explore, try things, see what happens. And I'll say that most things probably feel better than you think they're going to, too. I mean, things like creating the dances, I think, can be incredibly rewarding. So.
or other people using your dances. Like it's nice to make a good dance. Look at what the other person has a lot of stuff of, make their perfect dance, and then rake in the favor.
Yeah, well, and sometimes then you can actually turn that favor back into another dance too, which is pretty sweet as well. That can be really satisfying. So
I also think it's important for people to know, look, I played 2 4-player games so far and 1 1-player game. And it's very like people have done really well in different ways. I had one friend who like between the cards and the mats and the tiles he had, he just kept hibernating like real quick, like pulling back his workers. So he was on this engine. I think we were only a point apart. I went hard with the carvings. He went hard with the like pulling his worker back constantly with his engine to get resources. I think we're a point apart at the end. And another friend who in a different game went really big with the seed cards. Like I just felt like there were so many different, like no way seemed wrong. There were a bunch of these different ways that we would not have imagined when we first read the rule book.
yeah, no, and I think in the games that I've played so far, one of them I had 4 tucked seed cards and I had 35 points in seed cards. One of them I got to the end of the Queen's Favor track, which is 25 points. One of them had a whole bunch of carvings. Like it does seem like there's a lot of different paths to victory, which is obviously what you're trying to do anytime you're designing a game. So
We've played a lot of 2-player games, and they've been close every time so far. So
excellent.
that's what I love, and I love that when you finish a game, you don't know who's won until you add up the points. Kind of like Wingspan. It's always feel good for me.
Well, I think there's something that's deeply unfun. I mean, this is not a splatter game. This is not a game that is intended you lose on the first turn and then you sit there knowing that you've lost for 2.5 hours. I mean, first of all, it's shorter than 2.5 hours, but that's just kind of a miserable experience. I mean, I've played so many games where like you're like 3 turns in and you're like, oh, now I understand the game and I cannot catch up, and well, we're just gonna sit here.
Yeah, that unfortunately happens with my favorite game, which is Terra Mystica.
Yeah.
You can start bad, and it just does not. You just do not come back from that. Which brings me to my final question: what kind of games do you usually play, and what is your current favorite game?
Yeah, sure. So, current favorite game is really tough. I might punt a little bit and answer with current favorites, plural. Um, so,
Always okay.
so a few games that we've been playing a lot of lately, other than Apiary. I've been playing a lot of Frosthaven. So we did basically a full campaign of Gloomhaven and with the same group of people. And now we're 25 or so scenarios into Frosthaven. So that's been wonderful. I've been playing a ton of Forest Shuffle on BGA, which is an Essen release. It's not out yet, but it is great. I've already pre-ordered a copy. I can't wait to get it. It's a little tableau builder where you're basically planting tree cards in your forest, and then all of the cards that you get are split. So they're either split top and bottom or split left and right, and you're tucking them under the trees. That's a really, really great game. We've been playing a lot of Expeditions lately. Ever since we got our copy, that one's been hitting the table a lot. And I think the other game that I would sort of pull out of a hat is Dune Imperium. That one seems to hit the table a lot. It's such a good game. It's so tense. So I wear this Garmin, and every single time I play Dune Imperium, it will give me like 5 like stress alerts, and they're like, "You're really stressed. Like you should take a minute and breathe." And I'm like, "No, I'm just trying to get to 10 points."
That game is so intense.
It is. It is. In terms of favorite, it's such a good game. In terms of overall favorites, I do always have to call out the Resistance, Avalon in particular. That hidden role game has given me more like enjoyment than like any other game in my life, probably. Lying and bluffing and deceit and all of that. So I always want to sort of call out that. Decrypto is one of my favorites as well, which is a party game, but it's really not a party game. That one's also very, very tense. And then anything by that Italian design group. I mean, your Marco Polo, your Grand Austria Hotel, your Golem, really any of those games. So those are kind of a few favorites.
Love Grand Austria Hotel.
Yeah, and that's another tense one. Say that again?
I've only played Grand Austria Hotel on Yukata. I haven't played it in person yet.
Same.
On my review list. We played for Shuffle at Gen Con.
Nice.
It was there. So I actually played it with Susanna at Stonemeyer Games. We were playing that one night. So that's oh man, you want to talk about table space on that one? You're in person with that one? Whoa.
Yeah, because I think some of the goals have like 10 trees, and then each tree has like cards tucked under it. So you're obviously like,
Well, one of the friends we were playing with was saying he had a game, I think, did he say 18 trees, I think? Like, yeah, that one takes up table space.
It's a good one for BGA. Carol and I played BGA like nonstop.
Yeah, I've played at least like 6 or 7 games on BGA, and I just like keep hitting that like play new game button. So I should mention
a really good one on there.
I've actually been playing a lot of Earth on BGA too. I think that one's a good BGA game as well, because that one also takes up a lot of table space, and it's a little fiddly in person, and I think it plays really nicely on BGA. So
I
think it would work better real time though. Do you play real time on BGA or asynchronous?
So async is obviously slow because they have a lot of checks, a lot of like everyone has to confirm, and then everyone has to confirm, and everyone has to confirm. So, but yeah, we've actually been playing that one a fair bit in person as well.
That's a good one. Very cool. Well, I think that's all of our kind of prepped questions. Is there anything else you wanted to end with, Connie, or wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. Just really hope folks enjoyed the game. Really excited about it. I think it has a lot of really, really cool aspects. So I was really, really glad to get to chat about it. So thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. It was great.
Very much. Thank you for coming. And yeah, if there's anything else you ever think of adding in, just let us know. Obviously, the mill is always connected with Stonemeyer Games. So that's it, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We had a great time tonight with Connie. And if you have any other questions or curiosities, please put them in the comments below. Besides that, have a good night.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
At all.